Allow your passion to become your purpose, and one day it will become your profession. Could we have a better quote to start this session? Well, let's find out. Welcome to another inspiring episode of Dr. Kamini Rao's Masterclass. Today on our show, we have a speaker who at a very young age set his eyes on a professional career in cricket and chose pre-university college purely on the strength of its cricket team. Yes, dear friends, on the strength of its cricket team, not on the studies. Pursuing an academic career of a law student by chance, but today he has built an illustrious career in sports law. Sports law? Of course, that's a new dimension. He started his academic journey from St. Joseph's College of Commerce and further went on to pursue his dual masters from the University of Oxford and Harvard Law School. Yes, my dear viewers, he is a lawyer whose Twitter account is flooded with sports, and more sports. Let's hear it from the man himself, principal lawyer of the LawNK and the managing trustee of the GoSports Foundation. Welcome to the show, Nandan Kamath. It's a pleasure having you here with us, because it's not very often that we find a cricketer turning to sports law, for example. And that's what Kamini Rao's Masterclass is all about, bringing the extraordinary in the ordinary, and you're a perfect fit for that tagline. And I actually heard about you from my husband, and he says, this is one person, you've got to take him for his lateral thinking. At a very young age, you were into sports, and anyone would easily pass you off as a fast bowler, for example, or even in badminton because of your height. But nevertheless, you chose not only the college because of its sports, but also knew when to stop and get into serious profession, not because of the parents, but because you decided to do what was right for you. Today's generation tend to get carried away by glamour of sports and all those kind of t-shirts with all the emblems there, that they forget what is good for them and when they should actually get back and think. And I am quite surprised, Nandan, at a very early age, you were able to do that. So you said sports and law, they were by chance. Cricketing was destined and law was by design. So can you explain, how did you manage to think all this? Because your parents were so broad-minded, they left everything to you, and that must have been a big responsibility.
Yes, ma'am. First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor. You're someone who inspires so many people, and I think it's a wonderful chance to have this conversation. And you're right that my journey has not been a particularly planned one. Things happened to me. But what I've been able to do is dig deep and understand what makes me happy and what I care about. And for me, lots of that was related to sport. So as a young person, sport gave me so much of sort of self-exploration, making friendships. Just playing on the street is how I grew up. And we often forget the role of sport in defining us very early, and young people and their relationship with, like I say, notions of fairness, notions of justice. All of it happens right on the playground. When something goes wrong, you mediate it, you figure it out, but you resolve it and then you continue to play. And when you look back, and I look back now, I just recognize the value of play and sport in all of our lives. And at some point that we switch that off and it becomes something of the past. And being the lawyer that I am now, I look back and recognize the role of sport in even defining our notions of fairness, justice, right and wrong. And there was some connection, I think, in that journey which made me, one, just love sport, because there's something very universal and basic about it. It's your body playing, meeting other people, growing with them, learning, competing, trying to get better. And very early on, I realized that this was something that got the best out of me and gave me a good life. But I hadn't started playing particularly seriously yet. And I was the son of a cartoonist and a chartered accountant. So both,
What a combination.
yeah, both creativity and accuracy and numbers. So a lot of my friends joke that I was my mother's best cartoon, but be that as it may, I grew up in was a household which was full of ideas, full of exploration, creativity, books. So we're reading a lot, hearing about ideas, hearing about people going out and exploring the world. We were very fortunate at that point to do a fair bit of international travel as well. That really opened my eyes to sort of the world outside. But more than anything, I think sport showed me the world that was around us. Watching cricket in Australia, watching the World Cup, watching the Olympics, you suddenly realize that there's so many different people that populate this world. There's so much to learn from them, so much to be inspired by other people's journeys. They may be nothing like you. A diver from Canada, a horse rider from New Zealand, you can be completely different, but I can still be inspired by someone's journey and their quest to be the best. So that was the sort of household I grew up in, and sort of cricketer on the street. We played Wimbledon on the street, we played All England Badminton Championship. All of it happened on the street outside our home. But then I went to school, and I was at the St. Joseph's Boys High School, which had a real tradition of sport. And very early on, 4th standard, 5th standard, 4th standard, you join the school. My mother was very concerned about young boys going off the rails and doing naughty things and becoming not that good boys. So she took me to the PT instructor and said, I want to put him in sport. Just keep him occupied in the mornings and evenings so he doesn't do other stuff. And that was my first formal entry into sport. And really the first sport I played was field hockey. Our school had a very good hockey team. It used to host a hockey event each year inter-school. But gradually cricket took over as the sport that I was better at, and a skill that I think I just generally had. That skill sort of went further, and I started playing for the state team because I'd done well. At that point, I was much taller than the other kids, so that was a natural advantage. But I went to finish school, did quite well at my exams, and then this point came, right? What do I do next? And do I study engineering? Do I study science? Do I study what is the subject? So I said, give me a couple more years. Let me go to St. Joseph's College of Commerce. It had Rahul Dravid. It had all the best. I think the whole team was full of Ranji Trophy players at that point, which is incredible for a college team. I got in there, and I came to the end of second PUC and said, so what next now? And one of my close friends, was doing the exam for the National Law School. And he showed...
Before that, I think, Nandan, I'm just saying that cricket those days when you played was a gentleman's game. So even if you had a 4 or a 6, there was a way in expressing it. There was no grimacing, there was no shouting, there was no gesticulation, there was no bad language, and you didn't have cheer girls standing there with half naked bodies, throwing a few of these colored balls and things like this, and music playing, etc. So there was no razzmatazz over there. So you are really focused on the game. Say for example, when Vishwanath was given out, he didn't even wait for the umpires to tell him he was out. He just walked out, and that is even quoted today by many people. It was a truly, thoroughly gentleman's game. So even during your time, it hadn't been corrupted so much, and there was not that much of money also in that game. And you played in the sun, and obviously drinks meant one Coca-Cola or one Fanta, and that's all that you used to get. But today, if you see the game, many people come to the game for economic reasons. So they actually train, they have coaches, they have this thing. So it has become a profession in itself, and they have people who actually market them, and they have people who will actually endorse them. So there's a lot of these marketing firms. So even though the amount of money you get from playing the game, that's absolutely nothing. It's the endorsements that you get a lot more money. So suppose, Nandan, you were in this particular era compared to that era, would you have chosen law compared to cricket?
That's a very good question. To me, sport is really exemplification and reflects a society you live in. But equally, what is exciting for me is that sport plays an ambassadorial role and actually impacts the type of society. So it's a two-way interaction. And to me, that is the big question in some sense. What I've worked towards over the last 20 years is giving more young people chances to play sport. And professionalization has its pros, has its cons. When something becomes a profession, it also becomes the basis for reasonable livelihoods. But it can also sort of eat the core of the sort of the moral fabric of why sport is relevant and its role in society. So everything comes with its pros and cons. It's $1 million question, and maybe more than $1 million, whether I would have continued playing cricket. But it was a very different time at that point. And I was talking about getting into the National Law School. I did the exam by almost chance because my friend was doing it. I ended up getting admission. I didn't even study for the entrance test, but I got admission, got
Please
in.
repeat that again. You didn't read for an entrance exam.
No, I mean,
of the National Law School?
It was simpler times, just like cricket was in simpler times, the National Law School was in simpler times. So, I mean, I did get the whatever previous exam papers, and the night before I just looked at them. I found them very interesting because they were logic and general knowledge, some maths, which I also enjoyed. I went to the exam and I came 15th, I think, in the entrance test. And then I said, okay, I mean, if I'm good enough to get in, maybe I'm good enough to go ahead and be a lawyer. So it happened to me rather than something planned.
Something destined for you.
Absolutely. But it was a very big decision because I go in and I had to make this very significant choice between being a lawyer and being a cricketer. And I left behind that being a cricketer. No regrets at all. And I think it's also playing the game of life like a sports person. You need to know when you're up. You need to know what odds you're up against. You need to conserve your energy to come back and play again, perhaps. Maybe if you can keep your love for the sport alive. And in some sense, that's how my life has been. I've come back to sport as a professional, as a lawyer, much better trained and maybe contributing more than I could have as a cricketer. I might have I was a good junior cricketer. I might have ended up becoming a mediocre senior cricketer and had much more sort of ups and downs and been able to contribute much less back as a legacy. And here I've had that second shot. So life has its waves, ups and downs. Not everything goes exactly the way you want.
Always looked at life positive.
I wouldn't say positive or negative. I think you have to think of it, like I said, think as a sports person. And if you can think of it as a game, you have to be strategic, you have to be conserving your energy for the right moments, and you strike when things are with you, right? When you have the strength, you have the capabilities, and you see an opportunity. A good sports person sees that opportunity and grasps the opportunity. And timing is as important as sort of sensing the opportunity.
So when you just walked through the portals of the National Law School and you had to face the interview and the person asked you, you're very good in sports, how come you took up law? What made you take law? How did you feel?
I mean, it felt nice that I had been reasonably good at academics. I had no lawyers in my family, not that I had any sports persons either. So first time sports person, first time lawyer, first generation in both. But I just found it reconnected to the love for ideas, the love for how society works. And our founder, Dr. Madhav Menon, extremely inspiring, the way he built that institution. And his words still ring for me, is just that the lawyer's role is in social engineering. So how do you build a better society? And that has been a very strong motto for me of what is a life worth living, is using the law as a privilege that we entered a profession which has the capability to take people's lives and improve them and improve the society around us. I've been fortunate to be able to use the instrument of sport alongside law and to in some sense combine these two as an instrument that engineering, not in a sort of a very cynical way of making the society exactly the way you want it, but building capabilities and building an open society where opportunities are greater for more people. And in some sense, like you talked about the cricket being extremely professional, at the same time, lots of wonderful things have happened in sport as well, which is the democratization of sport. You look at the Indian cricket team, it comes from so many different cities, so many sort of smaller towns, people getting opportunities. people building livelihoods which may not have existed. And my hope is that if someone got into the National Law School and was still a cricketer, the equation might still be the same, but being a cricketer might still have a genuine chance in the person's sort of decision-making set, saying, I think I could make something of this and I'm talented, let me go ahead and do that. Because in more evolved cultures, we've seen, like in the US, you can be an athlete and you can be an Ivy League student at the same time. We haven't got there yet, but that's part of the work in progress.
Yes, I agree with you. But then if you look at a lot of artificial intelligence has gone into sports. Yes. And there's been a lot of sports medicine as such, law, sports medicine, and you've got a lot of, in sports medicine, you've got sports psychology, sports orthopedics, there's so much of sports, muscle, the things. So I can think of so much of ramifications in this. And if I were to just come back a little bit and touch law, when you talk about sports law, I think you've got to be first a very good lawyer. Absolutely. And then you can go into sports law. If you're not a good lawyer, you cannot be a good sports lawyer. And I feel that most people find it a big fancy to call them a sports lawyer when they really don't have a foundation of law. And would you agree with me on that?
You've taken the words out of my mouth in some sense. I think to start off with, all of us are failed sports people, whether we like it or not. We've all played sport at some point, except the ones who are professional sports people. So that love for sport is actually embedded in everyone, whether they allow it to come out or not. And we see a lot of young people wanting to do sports law, a lot of sports allied professions. And that's an exemplification of that reality that we love sport. We love the human body in motion. We love competition. We love enabling other people to be at their best. And sport has a lot of these elements. But when you're a professional contributing back to sport, the fundamental thing is you have to have the toolkit and the skills that can never compensate for having an interest or knowledge about the place you apply your profession. So that is in some sense the way my work played out as well. So I focused really the first 3-4 years building just legal skills. How do you draft contracts? How do you negotiate them? How do you manage clients? So both the hard skills of being a good lawyer, but also the soft skills of being able to communicate the law, manage clients, manage cases, manage expectations. And I didn't really have a chance to work on sports law till my 5th, 6th, 7th year in the profession, when I worked for 3 years in the US after my studies, and I came back to India. And it's only, I'd say 7-8 years into the profession, suddenly I started getting feelers back from sport. So I hadn't in the meanwhile lost my love for sport. I was very much a sports enthusiast, but a lot of the people I'd played with started coming back. Slowly the industry was growing and things like the IPL came up. So I attracted back people who wanted legal help from the sports community. And I was someone from the community who had left, built my toolkit, and now was being accepted back into the community as someone who could contribute.
I've always felt, Nandan, that people think that law is something which is black and white. I mean, you can never have a black and white law. There's always something which is a large area of grey. And what may be perceived as, yes for you can be no for somebody else, and both can be right. And yet people keep saying is that you're right and I'm wrong, or I'm right and you're wrong. It can be situational, it can be a perception. How do you actually look at, and maybe the situation, perhaps in a previous case, what you have said was a no, and in a subsequent case, that no can become a yes. And yet people will say, why do you change? I think law is ever changing, it is very situational, it is very perceptive, and it has to also have the right communication skills and also the right events being explained to you. Sometimes, the kind of facts are hidden, so you can go heavily wrong on your judgments. So I have found that there is so much to learn from what is actually said to you, to how you actually make your presentation, to how it is interpreted. So there are so many missing links in that whole thing, that the lawyer has to be extremely skillful on how he conveys that meaning and how the other party understands it.
No, I think it's beautifully put. I couldn't put it better, so maybe I shouldn't try. But the only part of law that is really black and white is sort of law on the books, right? It's printed on white paper, and that's the black and the white, because all the rest is really contextual. And the standard lawyer answer to any question is it depends. So, and it depends on many different things. It depends on what's the moral structure of things, the economics and markets of things. Law is constantly evolving, and many people see it as the only thing that regulates our lives, but that's so untrue, right? It's just one of many different things that may help us make our decisions, stop us from doing things, encourage us from doing things. Simple economics is a large factor. Our moral frameworks, the type of upbringing we have, are also natural regulators. So in some sense, many of our societies are so hung up on using law for everything. So it's like one hammer for every single nail, that we miss the context and the role of law, that the role that law should play in society, rather than the law as a sort of a solution for everything. And anything that comes up, you say, okay, there should be a law for this, ban this, stop this, regulate this.
Absolutely. But I would say that many a time, what should be sort of put into a basket for ethics
Absolutely.
is actually taken into law.
Exactly.
And ethics is totally different, and sometimes confronts law, and sometimes you find that ethics and law don't go together, and it need not go together. It doesn't mean whether ethics is wrong or law is wrong, because law only tells you what is the legal system there. Ethics tells you the culture.
Correct.
It tells you also how does one culture differ from another culture, and what is wrong in that. So every time you say that culture, the sick people take it for legal. So there's a lot of mix-up between ethics and law. Do you agree?
I totally agree, and that's why we have so many different legal systems all across the world, right? It's not the single law for every single society or culture. But at the same time, there are some universal laws, and we need to appreciate them. And to me, the excitement is that sport has some of those universal laws. We have a broader sports system which sits in sports law, where everyone can play, whether you're playing at the district level or state level, you're really playing in the same tournament which leads up to the World Championship. So there is these notions of fairness, the right to play, the ability to play well, what is a level playing field. So to me, the fascination of also sports law is finding universality, that everyone can agree that there are some fundamental ways of playing, there are some fundamental ways of living. You might all come from different cultures, but you all feed into the same Olympics or the World Cup, because effectively you're competing with people from all over the world, even when you're playing at the sort of the district level. And that is the fascination in this, is finding in the midst of so much moral ambiguity, different ethics, finding some universal principles of sort of respect, fair play, fairness.
In fact, another thing that really amazes me, that recently, at least in the last say 2-3 years, we've been seeing the Paralympics taking the center stage, and I am very, very interested to see that the person who is handicapped has actually done much better than the ones who really got all their bits and pieces together, and they have actually brought back 19 medals for India, whereas even the ones able-bodied people have got much less. So which means that the urge to perform is much more stronger in these people, purely because they have lost a particular part of their body, and so they have to make it up with the remaining parts of the body, and so they work much harder. And I find that the right to sports as a fundamental right, or the right to play in sports, and I think this particular time Narendra Modi ji has actually encouraged the Paralympics as well. In fact, I had an opportunity to interview Malti Holla, who has actually scored a lot of medals, and she was telling me that the government is now really looking at the Paralympics a lot, and I think they have done us proud. What do you think about Paralympics in the sports area?
So this is actually an area where in my other life, which is running GoSports Foundation. So this is a non-profit trust we started about 13 years ago. The quest there was to just give people greater opportunities to aspire for Olympic, Paralympic sports. And there, very early on, we made the decision that we are not going to just follow who's going to get the most medals, pick the most apt. or the most talented, but we're going to look much wider, look at sports which have never got supported, look at Paralympic athletes who really were not getting that much support. And we felt a strong need to create these role models and examples, because once you have one, the second, third, fourth, fifth happen much, much faster. So the very old story, obviously, of Roger Bannister and the 4-minute mile. So for many years, no one had done it. He was the first. But in the year or two after, literally 20 people broke the record. So much of it is in the mind that one person does it, so many others can. And early on when we started, there was this culture of, we are not good at sport, there's no point, don't waste your time, don't even bother. So we were told that we were very naive and trying to build something that was impossible to build. But our real belief was that if you can show 1, 2, 3 examples, a lot of the other things will pick up. And I can't come and tell you should love sport or we are good at sport, but I can create a few examples and then present new evidence. And I can say, Dr. Rao, why don't you look at this again, and would you be willing to reconsider whether Indians can be good at sport? So that journey really culminated in, the Olympics was a very successful event too. We had lots of people for the first time. We had a fencer at the Olympics. We had many people participating from our contingent in sports that India had never been represented in. So it was a big success. But the Paralympics was wonderful with 19 medals. And to me, it's what this message sends, that we've always had the skill, we've always had talent, we've just not provided the opportunities. And this was the first time maybe the degree of support matched the type of event this was, and you just saw so easily the transportation of talent into performance. And what does this mean for Indian sport, not just Paralympic sport, but for all sports, for someone who might have some other type of disability, that they have a social disability and are unable to break in. Removing the layers of privilege that sort of overlay so much of sport. It could be physical privilege, it could be economic, it could be social. And there's just huge amounts of talent, not just sporting talent, but talent of all sorts. The Paralympic success really can play an ambassadorial role to, not just in sport. It can play a role in sport, it can play a role in people with disabilities and the movement there of what is possible, but just even our own abilities to say, okay, I mean, we belong to the world, we belong, we can perform, we can excel. Nothing holds us back other than sort of our society together, but also our collective attitudes. I don't think anyone can do this alone. It's a culture that needs to be built around talents, which elevates. So an individual can only do so much, which is work hard. If they find a good coach, they can work with that coach. But meeting the talent to opportunities, I think we as a society have to hold people and elevate them and help them to grow. And once they reach their potential, just let them fly. So I think that is the quest for all of us, is to build a more collaborative society.